Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Branching Out, Benefits and Best Practices for Urban Forest Management Plans. Today, you'll hear from Dudek Urban Foresters Ryan Allen and Abby Beisinger, as well as Rebecca Ferdman, Sustainability Policy Director from the County of Los Angeles. Some quick notes before we get started. It's going to be about a 45-minute presentation, and we'll follow that up with a Q&A session. So you can type questions in the chat box, and then we'll address them after the presentation. And if you'd prefer to ask your question aloud, you can click the raise hand button, and we'll unmute you during the Q&A. As for the presentation itself, the slides will be shared via email sometime tomorrow, and we'll also provide a link to a recording of this webinar. And we can go over today's topics. So we're going to talk about what a UFMP is and how it can benefit your community, the best practices for developing a UFMP, and how to prepare a successful request for proposals when you're getting ready to do a UFMP. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters so that they can introduce themselves.
Great. Thank you, Rose. It's good to see everyone online virtually today. My name is Ryan Allen. I lead Dudek's Urban Forest Planning Team. I've been doing urban and community forestry work for over 15 years now. Started in the nonprofit community based work, and then been with Dudek for going on 6 years now, and been doing a lot of urban forest planning in that time, and excited to talk with you all today.
Hi, folks. Pleasure to have you here today. My name is Abby Beisinger. I'm an urban forester and plant pathologist with Dudek. I've been doing this work for about 3 years, and within the climate resiliency and science-informed urban forest management plan practice for about, or within this area for about 9 years. I'm a project manager for several of our urban forest management plan projects and tree ordinance update projects in the Northwest and throughout California. And I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you today. I'm Rebecca Ferdman. I'm a policy director with the Los Angeles County Chief Sustainability Office. My portfolio includes building decarbonization, climate resilient infrastructure, and also urban ecology and biodiversity issues. And that's where urban forest management planning falls in our office. And I've been the project manager for our urban forest management plan. I'm excited to share some of the lessons that we've learned and best practices that we found along the way.
Great. So as we all know, trees are a critical infrastructure in our cities, but when they're not properly planned for, they can cause some pretty big problems. And so an urban forest management plan, or as we've been referring to it, a UFMP, it's intended to be a guiding document that establishes how a municipality will manage its trees based on the needs of the municipality, its elected officials, and also its community members. And a UFMP provides a roadmap to manage trees in a way that achieves a shared vision for the future of the urban forest. And it includes short and medium and long-term goals for how to get there. And developing a UFMP really is a multi-step process. And in some cases, it can take multiple years. And so today, what we want to talk about, really what we want to start out with, is what you need to consider before you take on the UFMP process to help you get set up for success and establish the best UFMP possible. So the first thing to consider are the people that would be involved in the plan. And as we know, urban forests are managed largely by people, and there are lots of disparate groups that care about trees in lots of different ways. But working together with all of these different groups is key to achieving success for the urban forest. So a few things to consider before starting out with your process is who will be on the project team on the municipal or city side to manage the project. And will the project be best run in-house or in collaboration with a consultant or a nonprofit group? UFMP is honestly much likelier to be implemented if it reflects the needs and priorities of the community. So spending some time thinking about the level of community engagement activities and opportunities you'd like to include in the process is really going to help set you up for success. And later on, Ryan will talk a lot more about different options for community engagement and other best practices to kind of help spur some thought for you as you go on. So the next thing to consider are your trees, and having a really in-depth understanding about your trees in your municipality is key. We've seen several cities in recent years come to the UFMP process with tree inventories that are over 15 years old or might not have any tree inventory at all. And although it's possible, it's really hard to create a UFMP with super old data. It can be done, but it's much less effective. And also during this process, you're likely to complete a canopy cover assessment, and that'll give you an understanding of the percentage of tree cover in your city. But if you've already completed a canopy cover assessment, the UFMP will also use that data to set goals for the future. And the canopy cover assessment can be used as a metric to measure your urban forestry program success in planting and tree management. But the sensitivity of that analysis will vary greatly depending on the quality of aerial imagery that's available. And so consider all of your available data sources in advance. And again, as I said, a UFMP can still be put together, but it's much more effective when it's developed from recent data. So next, you'll want to consider how your trees are managed and who or which departments are actually doing the management. So the UFMP will make recommendations about the ways your urban forest program is staffed and funded and managed. And so having a really good understanding of about these areas will help you clue into key recommendations. And also thinking about any other available sources of data within your municipality. So do you have really good work history records to understand how your trees are being managed annually, such as the rate at which your trees are being pruned or removed or planted? Or even throughout conversations to set you up for the UFMP, has your municipality identified issues before about the ways that trees are being managed? Common things are issues such as tree record software. Maybe multiple different departments are using different management softwares, or having a significant backlog of work to identify that you need a lot more staff members to be able to manage your urban forest successfully. And the next thing you'll want to consider is how this document will align with other guiding documents at your municipality. Often one of the most obvious ones is your tree protection ordinance. These can be a standalone ordinance or part of a different land use or zoning code ordinance. Or maybe you don't have a tree protection ordinance at all, but you're interested in creating one and don't know where to start. If you do have a tree protection ordinance, consider the last time it's been updated or if it's still followed or implemented. One of the oldest land use codes I've seen that was governing tree protection was from 1989. And so, you know, the policies that were in place 30 plus years ago likely do not reflect today's times. And the UFMP will also set goals for things like canopy cover and tree planting, and lots of other standards. And so it's important that these goals are reflected in other long-range city planning documents, like maybe your climate action plan, general plan, and comprehensive plan. So all really important things to think about as you're setting up the UFMP process to determine kind of what direction you want to move forward. So next, I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk a little bit more about creating an urban forest management plan.
So thanks, Abby. So that question of why create a UFMP, why are we going to do this? One of the main tenets of urban forest sustainability is that for the most part, by and large, urban forests are planted by people and require our intervention to help them grow and survive. This can, look very different depending on the community that you live. Some places some cities might have been developed in naturally forested areas. So you might have an existing urban canopy that was not planted by people, but now it exists within the urban footprint along roads, next to houses, schools, parks, things like that. And we need to now manage them because they are interacting with us in our daily lives. Conversely, cities like here on the West Coast were not largely treed areas when the cities were developed. So all the trees that we now have that make up our urban forest were planted and planned as the city grew and developed. And the image that we have here on the right is really the the main point of doing this process. The more that we invest in our trees, in their maintenance and in their care, the more that they will give back to us over time. Trees are city infrastructure that, as they grow and develop, give back more in their environmental services and economic benefits. So if we want those to continue to increase, we have to take care of that resource. Some other reasons, I think we all know what happens when we don't properly plan for our trees and things that we see in our communities all the time. We have, a large trees planted under power lines that now have to be pruned in really weird and awful ways to maintain clearance between the trees and the lines. Trees planted in the wrong place. We have, this picture in the middle where there's a large tree planted right on top of a water meter. Large trees going in small places. We've all experienced broken sidewalks or lifted sidewalks that potentially, could have been avoided if we put a smaller tree that was more appropriate for that space. So if we want to avoid these conflicts, and increase our trees and their benefits, then we have to plan for them and do that actively. All right, so real quick, we're gonna launch a little poll question here and just kind of get an idea of what are some of the challenges that you're facing with your urban forestry program. And go ahead and click on one or multiple reasons or issues that you might be dealing with. And we'll kind of see what those results look like and see if there's some common themes amongst the folks listening in today. Great. Well, looks like we're getting some results coming in. If you still haven't got a chance to vote, go ahead and do that real quick. But right now, we don't have one clear standout. It's looking like declining tree health, lack of tree canopy cover, and gaps in data are the main issues that folks are dealing with, followed closely behind by funding and staffing. So it looks like everyone on the call here is kind of dealing with very similar issues. So if you, hopefully as you're listening in, if you see something that resonates with you or a question that you have, please make sure you make a note of that, and we'll be happy to talk about it at the end of the presentation. All right, so let me go ahead and close that poll out. And we will move forward and get to chat with our guest and speaker here today, Rebecca Ferdman with LA County. Thank you for making some time to join with us and share your experience. As for the folks out there, the County of Los Angeles has been in the process of developing an urban forest management plan for the last 2 years, and Rebecca has been the lead for that project for the county, and we are happy to have her with us. So just want to start off with this question, why did the county decide to do of all the things the county could have done and spend time on, why are we doing this urban forest management plan?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And we are really excited about our urban forest management plan because I think it does serve a lot of our priorities at the county and at my office at the county, which is the Chief Sustainability Office. And I think it goes back for us to the foundational document that our office works off of, which is the sustainability plan for the county. It's called the Our County Plan. And we had a lot of feedback from all kinds of stakeholders, community groups, and experts when we were putting together that guiding vision of sustainability for the county. And one of the actions in that plan was that we would eventually go on to create an urban forest management plan for the county that would have heavy community engagement, that would focus on shade canopy equity, that would look at issues of biodiversity and climate resilience. And so when we looked at our county plan, we had about 159 actions in that plan. We knew we couldn't do them all at once. And so one of the first tasks of our office after creating that plan was to prioritize all of those actions. And what we found was that when we talked to county departments and when we talked to community stakeholders, this action to create a community or urban forest management plan for the county was one of the highest priority actions. It came up again and again as something that staff at the county and people in the community really wanted us to go forward with and to find funding for because they felt like tree management was a priority for them. And so that's why we targeted this plan as a priority for our office. And the reason we're able to do it now, and the reason the time is right now, is because we were able to secure funding for our plan through a state program. So our plan is being funded by a grant from CAL FIRE. And we're lucky that we are able to do our urban forest management plan process funded by CAL FIRE in partnership with another grantee, which is the City of LA. So it's an opportunity for the County of LA and the City of LA to work together to talk to our communities, which are often shared, about what tree priorities matter to them and what they want to see out of urban forest management. And so for us, and what we're hearing from the communities again and again, those priorities at the top, it's equity. Do people have access to the benefits of trees in the same way all across the county? We know that they don't. And so this plan is a roadmap to go towards a place where we do have tree canopy equity across the county. Other priorities that are coming to the top as we're going through our planning process and actually wrapping up, hopefully, our planning process are of course, climate resilience. So not only the resilience of the trees themselves to climate change, but how trees can then provide resilience to our communities in the face of climate change. Biodiversity is another big one that comes up again and again when we talk to stakeholders. And also because of the role of the county, regional collaboration is a big issue for our community or urban forest management plan. So it's a plan not just for the county and our unincorporated areas, but a plan that we hope can serve as a template for cities in our region or for other stakeholders in our region who are looking for best management practices and sort of next steps that they can take on tree management.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting component because I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening that are represent cities or towns or maybe community organizations, but the county is really unique because yes, there's county managed lands, but it's really all those 88 cities and 121 unincorporated communities that this plan is really directed towards, which is very unique and I'm sure challenging opportunity for this project.
Yeah, I think the county does have a unique role in that we have all of these different stakeholders and different jurisdictions within our boundaries. But I think what's not unique is the fact that tree management can't happen in a silo. I think for any city that's considering an urban forest management plan or for any stakeholder who's thinking about how to manage their trees better, they can't really think only about their trees because we know issues like invasive pests or climate change, issues that affect our trees and that affect also our communities cross those boundaries. And so it's important to figure out who your partners are, whether inside your jurisdictional boundaries or even oftentimes outside of them. And that's part of the challenge and part of the opportunity, I think, of an urban forest management plan is finding those opportunities to work together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this first installment, and we will come back to Rebecca in just a little bit with some more insights from her and what she's learned. Thank you. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what goes into developing an urban forest management plan, some of the process and things that you would want to consider along the way. First, this is like Abby mentioned earlier, forming the team is a real critical, important first step in how you're going to approach your urban forest management plan. Which department leads the project can have a really steer the project in a different direction or different directions depending on their goals and their focuses. So often, public works or park and recreation are departments that manage trees directly, whether it's street trees, park trees. They're the ones that typically are doing the direct management of a city's inventory or town or county. And so they might have different priorities because they're looking specifically at the trees that they manage, this day-to-day operations, and their focus could be more in that direction. A sustainability office or a planning department typically are looking at things on a broader scale across the city, across different issues, and a group like the sustainability department maybe is tied into the mayor's office or the city manager. So maybe there's some different political considerations. So when we are, thinking about who's going to first lead that project, we need to think about our long-term outcomes and goals and what we want to get out of it. If we need a plan that's really just focused on the day-to-day operations, then your public works and parks and rec departments would be absolutely great leads for that. If we're looking at something that's going to be a little bit more holistic, then maybe we need a sustainability or planning focus. After you have that group that's going to lead it, then we definitely need to make sure we have all the other city departments, elected officials, maybe it's your state forestry agency involved in that process along the way, where they're informed about the different aspects of the project, the data that's being analyzed, the results, and they're giving feedback and guidance on developing goals and objectives for this plan. You need to having that buy-in from the whole city from the beginning is really critical. So when you get down to the end of it, it's not the first time that they've seen the plan, they've had input, they've given direction to it. So when you're looking to get this thing adopted and move forward and then acted on after it's implemented or adopted, you have that buy-in from your key members within the city. Just as important, or maybe even more so, are the community members that you're going to be working with. UFMPs need to reflect the values and priorities of the people that are going to be impacted by your tree management decisions. So thinking about what level of involvement you will like to have with your community members, and how you plan to do that. What are the prominent voices? Maybe you have a leading tree nonprofit in your community. Maybe you don't. Sometimes that can be a great thing. If you have if the city and the nonprofit organization, if you both have a real cohesive relationship, then that's fantastic. And maybe you're good partners together. But there's also different groups that lead different subsections of your communities and your neighborhoods that are very important voices that often aren't considered beyond that tree nonprofit in being a part of these planning processes. And those folks are, those leaders are really important to making sure that we're getting everyone involved in this process that represents all the different demographics and communities of the place that you live. And then lastly here, how are you going to do it? There are very straightforward things that we typically see. Maybe it's an online survey or pop-up events, but each of the different types of engagement activities can have different types of results and information that you gather and learn different things. So some of those online activities have the ability to reach a really large audience, but you're probably going to get a lot shallower of in-depth information. Conversely, if you have in-person activities where you're getting to talk one-on-one with community members, you might not reach as many, but you're going to get more, have deeper filling conversations and probably get some more specific guidance on how your plan can look moving forward. So having a combination of both those types of activities and thinking through, maybe it doesn't have to be a tree event, standalone tree event. Often it's really hard to get people to come out to a standalone tree event, but maybe there's, a big summer or spring event that, hundreds, thousands of people go to. Why don't we tack onto that? Go where people are instead of having people thinking of trying to get people to come to us all the time. All right, data. So Abby mentioned the tree inventory. It's really critical to have a completed tree inventory within the past 5 years to have accurate information to analyze and assess as part of your management plan. Your tree inventory is key to so many different management actions, species selection, so many different decisions that you're going to make are based off of data that comes from your tree inventory. So having recent inventory information is critical. Also, that second line or third line, independent assessment. Often inventories are completed by the contractor in a city who also trims the trees. And, there's kind of an inherent conflict there. So having somebody who doesn't do your tree work, do your tree assessments is a good best practice to make sure that you're having a real independent view that doesn't have an alternate goal other than just giving you good tree information. Making sure you have, that inventory needs to have species, condition, size, location, and management needs just as a baseline. There are lots and lots of different fields that you can include in a tree inventory, but you need to know what types of trees you have, what condition they're in, how big they are, where they are, and what kind of management. Those are the key basics that you can build off of from there. And then if there's other, larger information that you want to have, do that. And then last, having a current planting list is really important. So with all of our communities that we're working in, we need to think about how climate change is impacting our trees. For us in the West Coast here, drought and heat, wildfires are large considerations. So a lot of our trees that we planted in our Mediterranean climates that were great for 50, 60 years aren't going to be great for the next 50, 60 years. And so evaluating, okay, what trees can we plant now that will be good for the next 50 to 100 years? Figuring out spacing. How far apart can we put these trees so we can avoid those infrastructure conflicts, so we can not have to worry about repairing a sidewalk, but also not influence public opinion and give them a reason to not want a tree. We want to create a positive experience for our community members, and so limiting issues that they have is really critical for that. And then not just for your city staff and departments that are working and planting trees, but also really everyone within your community can benefit from having a well thought out list of trees that they can pick from for their either commercial or residential developments and plantings, for their home, front yards and backyards, and then giving them some guidelines on spacing so they don't make some of those same mistakes as well. Canopy cover is a real critical piece of the puzzle to understand just how much of your community is covered by trees, and along with that, how much are you benefiting from trees in your community? So some best practices for canopy cover analysis is, if you haven't done one yet, your first analysis, do it with, as recent data as is reasonable and feasible. So oftentimes aerial imagery is available from, there are county consortiums that do flyovers. So there might be some free aerial imagery or LiDAR. Um, if you can get that information within, even if it's within the last year, your overall land cover and canopy cover isn't going to change real drastically within a year period. So typically that's, if it's 2024 and you're using 2023 information, that's going to be a good place to start. And then doing that every 5 years in the same process. So you can compare how you're growing, or where you're growing and gaining canopy, and just as importantly, where you've lost it, to help determine maybe too, like, why are you losing canopy cover? Sometimes it can be really obvious. There was an orchard and now it turned into a housing development. Okay, that's why we lost canopy. But sometimes there are some nuances and less obvious things, and having that change analysis can really help inform how you're progressing towards your goals. And then if not, what are some of the reasons maybe you're being held back? To do the best, highest, most precise canopy cover analysis and land cover classification project, you need to have aerial imagery with LiDAR. So the aerial imagery will help you with aerial imagery with 4-band color spectral imagery will give you help you identify trees and buildings and vegetation, but the LiDAR helps give you height information. So LiDAR will help you separate from a shrub to a tree, so they don't both get classified as a tree. So if you have that LiDAR with your aerial imagery, you're going to get a very highly accurate land cover classification to tell you where your trees are, like you can see on this image on the right. Your trees, shrubs, ground cover, bare ground, impervious surfaces, water, all those things that you need to help figure out your long-term goals. If you are looking to go from 20% to 25%, your canopy cover and land cover project will help tell you how many trees it'll take to get there. And then subsequently, if you need to go from planting 100 trees a year to 500 trees a year, well, then you're going to have to plant 500 more trees and water and care for 500 more trees and prune and remove and et cetera. And it just helps look down that line at your budgeting. And then identifying priority areas. We need to know where to start, which neighborhoods are lacking canopy cover, and also neighborhoods that are more susceptible and sensitive to climate change. So often, our communities that are underserved and historically disinvested need trees first. And we only have so many resources, so we need to focus on those communities that are the highest priorities. When it comes to best management for tree practices, or I'm sorry, best management practices for trees, there are kind of two different sections of this. So first, we need to look at how you are managing your program. So what I mean by that is, do you have a process for selecting trees from a nursery? How many trees a year do you plant? What's your program for watering and early establishment care? What's your pruning cycle? How shortly after a tree removal is identified, do you remove it? Those are part of your urban forest management program. And then with that, you also have your direct tree management practices that are those standards and details that the International Society of Arboriculture and American National Standards Institute have set and kind of codified for how to do tree work. So you have those both aspects of your management program that need to be assessed and understood, and setting, your goals and standards internally. ISA and ANSI are kind of set. There's only, a tree is a tree, right? There's a correct way to prune it, a correct way to plant it, and everyone should be held and doing those same standards, and not just your city staff, but your contractors and anyone doing tree work within your community. But the program practices can somewhat vary. depending on your resources and your budget needs and the needs of your trees and your urban forest. So you need to look at your program and understand your long-term goals to help figure out what those practices will look like for your community. Because that has a real important component in this next part of your budget and staffing. The more information you have, the better it is, the more we can, or more you can do to understand exactly what your long-term budget needs are going to be and how much it'll take to get there. If you have really great information on your annual pruning cycle, how much it costs to prune a tree, et cetera, we can plan this out over a 10-year period. And then when you're done looking at it, you can take these detailed budgets that give a really good estimate and go to your council, your mayor's office and say, look, we need to make a critical investment here because right now we're managing trees at this level. We need to be here and this is the roadmap to get there. And so when you can provide those numbers with some good solid detail, then you have a roadmap and you have a starting point to have those somewhat, often difficult budget discussions. And that can help inform, how many staff are needed. Are you going to do contracted labor or are you going to have in-house staff? That's a real, a decision that community cities have to think through. If you're doing work with in-house staff, then you're going to need, then you're taking on that cost over the long term. It's part of your annual budgets. You're going to need the equipment as well to make sure that they can do their jobs. With contracted labor, you don't have those permanent on the book staff, but you're also, at the whim of contractors and their ability to meet your needs. So there's, benefits to each kind of method, but understanding and knowing which approach works best for your city is really important. And then funding sources. Yeah, how are you going to pay for this? That's a really important part of putting together your management plan. Making sure your project understands that the majority of our trees are on private property. So with any community, trees make up about 65 to up to 90% of your urban forest. So having a plan for those trees is very critical. Often that can be a private property tree protection ordinance, and UFMPs can be a good time to either create one, update one, or at least begin the process of understanding what your community would need. Additionally, there's other considerations with private property practices. So what kind of tree plant or free tree giveaways or other incentives might you have and consider to make sure that residents can grow and maintain trees on their private property and that those potential barriers that they might have can be overcome. And then finally here, looking at our planning documents, we need to make sure that our urban forest management plan is aligned with the goals of your community, of your city, town, county, etc. The more that we can direct your plan towards what's already existing, then it's not something new. It's aligned with current principles and practices and goals of the city. And so it's supporting that work and not something new and different that's extra work that somebody has to do. So understanding what that policy is or that planning document is whether it's your general plan, comprehensive plan, a climate action plan, looking at it, understanding it, knowing what goals are within it, and then directing your project towards that. Long-term strategy, making sure your goals and actions, one, reflect the values and priorities of your community. If you're going to do all that engagement work, we need to reflect that we listened and that's in the planning document itself. Whatever those priorities and values are, that as much as we can incorporate that into the goals and actions is really critical. Less is more. So there are so many things that need to be done often. But let's focus on the big ones, the main things that can get the most work done. There's only so much time staff have and ability and resources to do these things. So let's make sure we're focusing on the steps that are going to have the biggest results. And then the UFMP is an adapted document. So over time, we reflect and we go back and say, okay, is this still a priority? If so, yes, let's keep working on it. If it's completed, then what's in the next step after that? So start with the main goals and then work from there. The UFMP is a public commitment. If you commit to planting 1 million trees, you're going to be held to planting 1 million trees. So make sure it's realistic. It's things that you can get done. And whatever numbers you're putting in those goals, you feel confident in that you can achieve them, even if it's a stretch, that you can get there. And then making sure you focusing on the implementation of who's going to help get these things done, what are they, and when are they going to get done. Without having that, then we don't really have the guidance that we need to complete our plans. And then finally here, tell the story. An urban forest management plan is a communication tool at the end of the day. And we need to recognize some key things. One, I would love to believe that people read, 150 pages of technical assessment, but they don't. We need to recognize that we need to communicate the main points and do it in clear and visual ways so people are engaged with the document, understand it, and can take home those most important things that we want them to focus on. So, brevity is best, and we can have all that technical work, but let's save it for an appendix, and let's really focus on the UFMP, on really having those clear graphics and visuals to tell a story. So it's as accessible to as many people as possible. All right, Rebecca, jump back in here real quick. Thanks for waiting for me. So just 2 quick questions here. What did you wish you knew before you started the UFMP, and what have you learned that surprised you?
Yeah, both great questions. So you probably, those of you on the call who've just sort of seen all those steps and all those considerations, everything that goes into creating an urban forest management plan, you can see that there's a lot of work there, a lot of people you need to talk to, a lot of points of view that need to be considered and weighed. It's really also a very iterative process where you might write down some ideas, but then you have to go back and say to the departments, to the community, did we get this right? Does this reflect what you told us? And then, take that feedback again. And all of that takes a lot of time, which sounds obvious, but I sort of wish that I had had a better sense when we started out this project of our timeline, and really given myself, given the timeline, the room it needed to really give each of these pieces of the project their full attention so that you don't feel a crunch or rushed at the end. So I would definitely say I wish that I had given my timeline a little bit more breathing room, and set myself up a little bit more for a longer process. But I think that being said, the other thing that I am learning now and that I wish I knew was that, and I think Brian alluded to this a few times, but the plan is really important. It's important that the plan reflects your community, reflects your municipality, reflects your values. But at the end of the day, the plan is the first step. It's the beginning. And so it's not as important that every single detail of every plan and policy that you would like to see related to trees in your community for the next 50 years is included in the plan. What's important to include in the plan is everything you need to then hit the ground running and start taking action. This is a starting point. Once the plan is done, you must begin implementation. And so as long as your plan includes the framework for that, the foundation for you to then take the action that you've identified that you need to take, then I think you'll find that you have a successful plan. So I wish that I had maybe appreciated that a little bit more fully. And I hope that will be the case with our plan, which will be finalized a little bit later this year. In terms of surprises and what I've learned, I don't know about folks on the call, but I personally am not a tree expert. I don't have a background in tree management or tree policy. So I was new to the world of urban forest management planning when I began this project. And so I've learned a lot of things that surprised me. But I think for me, the biggest learning experience was really in the community engagement phase. We at the county, we span 4,000 miles. We've got coastal communities, desert communities, rural mountain communities, densely urban communities, everything in between, all different types of social groups and ecological areas. And we did engagement across all of those places and listened to things that different people in different communities had to say about trees. And a lot of it is what you would expect, but there is always something I found that would surprise me that would be different for each of those community groups that I wouldn't have known or wouldn't have fully appreciated if we hadn't taken the time to really go to each of those communities and listen to what they have to say about trees. And I think one example of this that stands out to me, which is maybe a bit of a small example, but we found that when we went to talk to communities about their priorities related to trees, again and again, people would bring up fruit trees as being really important to them socially, culturally, even emotionally, or even just because they maybe live in a food desert and they need more access to fresh fruit. And people had a lot of really interesting personal stories about the fruit trees in their lives and how they were important to them. And I think as someone on the policy side who was thinking about creating an urban forest management plan for the county, that was really eye-opening because fruit trees are not a big policy priority for most municipalities. Most of us are thinking about street trees, park trees, tree protection ordinances, maybe for native species or things like that. We're not really typically in the business of fruit trees, but it's something that's really important to our communities here in LA County. And so for us, it was important to really sit with that feedback and think about what is the best way for us to incorporate this totally other type of tree, fruit trees, into our vision for our community forest. And so that was something that we've incorporated into the plan. And it's actually something that I'm really excited to be piloting, hopefully in the implementation phase, is some partnerships related to fruit trees. And I think that came as a bit of a surprise.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. We'll come back to you just real quick in a second here. But, the last thing just wanted to share was, we talked about what you need to think about before you get started, what goes into it. We have to recognize that a lot of cities, communities, or staff, you're busy. You're probably going to need outside help to get this project together. So it's really important to think, what is your main goal? What do you really want to get out of this when you're putting together that RFP and crafting your RFP towards that goal? There are, like we discussed, there are lots of different aspects of things that go into putting together an urban forest management plan. But the more you understand what your key priorities are and what you really want to get out of this, the more you can direct that RFP towards those goals, then the more likelihood you're going to get out of this what you want to get out of it. Budgeting appropriately is very important. Nobody wants to have to go back and forth on change orders or figuring out like, oh, do we need more money for this, or can we do this aspect? I don't know if we have enough money for this. So making sure how much, what work you want to get done, and have a good idea of what it's going to cost when you're putting together that proposal. Like Rebecca said, give yourself plenty of time. These things can take longer than you might expect, especially with the level of community engagement and review from city staff that might go into it. Typically it's going to be about a 1.5 year long process, maybe less, can be more depending on the size and complexity of the project, but usually about 18 months is what it's gonna be. And then finally, the more you can get together some of the data and have that prepared, the more that you will be able to hit the ground running once the your team is on board and ready to go to work. So Rebecca, right back to you again here. So yeah, what advice would you give to those out there who might be putting together an RFP for one of these at some point?
Yeah, so important to get the RFP right, because it really sets you up for the scope of your whole project. And it can be tough to know exactly what your scope should look like before you really jump into it. But acknowledging that, I think there are a couple of things that you can think about ahead of time that will set you up for success. And the first is that I would say you should really start out with a clear idea of the driving sort of values or priorities that are causing you to pursue the development of an urban forest management plan in the first place. And so as an example, at the county, we knew that tree canopy equity was going to be one of our main driving factors. We wanted to make sure that our plan was a plan and a path forward for tree canopy equity in the county. But your plan might have different priorities. Perhaps you have particular issues with your parks or with your street trees that you want to address. Maybe you have concerns about habitat and biodiversity. It'll be different for every community, but I think understanding that ahead of time, knowing what those priorities are, will help you shape your RFP to make sure that you're addressing those major concerns. But then I think the second thing that I would advise would be to really take some time to think about who it is you need to engage around your community forest management plan to achieve your goals, and what that engagement needs to look like in terms of time and in terms of resources, and to make sure that your RFP reflects those time and resource needs. And so, for example, at the county, we knew we wanted to have a really robust community engagement plan associated with the development of our UFMP. And we know from prior experience that takes a certain amount of time and it takes a certain amount of money. So for us, for example, if we want to reach certain community-based organizations in the county that have limited capacity to engage, we know that we need to set aside funding in our budget to be able to provide stipends to those CBOs for their time and their participation in any work that we would like them to do associated with our project. We knew that, at the county, we have so many different departments that work with trees. We have public works and parks, but also ISD, regional planning, beaches and harbors. And we know that the timelines for those departments to review materials and get back to us can be long and iterative. And so we knew we had to build in a lot of time for multiple levels of review. So when you're sitting down to think about your RFP, I would say those types of considerations: who are you going to need to reach, and what will they need from you in order to be engaged, should be considered right from the start, because they have important implications for your budget and for your timeline in order for it to be realistic.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. I think we've reached the end here. So I know we just have a couple minutes, but I don't know if we had time, Rose, for if there's any questions that came up along the way that we could get to real quick, or not.
Yeah, great presentation, everyone. We do have some time for Q&A, although currently we're not seeing anything in the Q&A chat box. Okay. As a reminder for folks, you can type in questions in that Q&A chat box, or if you want, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you want to ask something aloud. But yeah, nothing came through, probably because you guys covered everything so well. That was a lot of great material. But yeah, to wrap things up, if you do think of questions after the fact, you can always email us after the webinar. Our email address is included in this slide. And so you'll also be receiving these slides and a link to this recording sometime tomorrow. But yeah, if you think of anything, shoot us an email. We're happy to explain further, dive into things a bit more. But with that, if we don't have anything pop up, which it looks like we're still good, that's pretty much it for us today. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day.